we're good there. My name's Chris Lindgren. I've worked with UVM Extension for about 7 years now. I'm actually going to shut off my video. Can my video get turned off, Tom or Mark, from your end? Okay, that looks like it did. Great. As Mark mentioned, I split my time between managing the Forest Business Program, where I work with forest and wood product businesses one-on-one to help improve business profitability. I also work with Mark Cannella and the Maple team on economic research and development projects, and that's what this presentation has grown out of. I started investigating Sap Business economics 15 years ago, got more serious about it maybe about 5 or 6 years ago in Weston, Vermont on the hillsides where I live, and I harvest sap from about 700 taps in 3 nearby sugar bushes. I'm going to stop a couple of times during this presentation to address questions. It'll probably be easiest to handle those if we put those questions into the chat box, and I'll get to a couple of them depending on how much time we have, and we can address these during those breaks. So tonight's presentation, I'm going to share some of what we've learned about the business of sap. Sap selling has always been part of the industry, but little research that we're aware of has been done on the economic viability or the cost of production of sap businesses. This work that we've got going on here is a start, but it's surely not the end. We have not specifically researched sap businesses. We've mined existing data for sap business information. We've worked with over 50 maple businesses in our benchmark project, and we've gleaned data from 21 sap business responses to our Northeast Producer Survey that we put out last year. And this meta-analysis has indicated that there's an opportunity in sap enterprises. This presentation is going to include a quick review to get us all on the same page, a taste of some of the research on sap businesses, and the cost of woods activities from our Extension Maple team. And we're going to conclude looking at planning tools and other useful resources for starting and running maple sap businesses, and then look at a couple of sap business models. So what is a sap business? In the Northeast producer survey we put out, we identified businesses as Sap Only Business. And it's about as simple as it sounds. A sap business harvests sap from forests and sells the sap or trades the sap for syrup. The sap business is the woods part of the maple syrup production. So with over 10,000 maple farms in the US, why more sap businesses? Well, the big picture is that sugaring is a driver of economic development, a growth industry for rural areas that provides jobs and supports keeping forests at forests. It's estimated that only 3% of the maples are tapped, so there's substantial growth potential here. On a personal level, at the company level, economics, why would you start or have a sap business? This question is core to business planning, and we each have our own answer to this question. I got started because I have some maple trees. I gather and sell sap as a way to begin the investment and the reinvestment growth cycle. And I expanded from my first 8 acres right around my house into maybe about 15 acres on neighboring property. And that's the way a lot of maple enterprises and sap businesses grow. So gathering and selling sap is the easiest and the lowest cost way to get started in a maple business. So first, a quick review here. I'm sure a lot of you know this, but I want to put it out there on the relationship between sap and syrup and the methods for valuing or pricing sap. So we likely all know that sap from maple trees is collected and processed or dewatered via reversed osmosis and or evaporation to produce maple syrup. Hence, the price of sap is directly connected to the price of syrup. And the bulk price of syrup is generally used to determine the value of sap. Current bulk prices are around $2.10 a pound, which is $23 a gallon, more or less. I generally am rounding the figures that I'm using in this presentation since figures move around over time. So SAP varies in quality over the course of a season. Quality is also affected by the freshness and SAP handling and storage. Quality affects grade, which in turn impacts the value or the price that is paid to a SAP producer. The other variables impacting SAP value is sweetness. Sweeter SAP requires less energy inputs to concentrate into syrup. This makes sweeter SAP worth more per gallon. 2.4% SAP is worth more than 2% SAP. So that's a quick review. Now we're going to look at some of the research we've done quickly. So our survey work hints that there is underutilized processor capacity. And talk to the producers you know about how much more SAP that they could process without expanding substantially. With 60% of the processors using reverse osmosis, SAP handling and processing has increased at the company level. This is driving expansion in the woods. So for every buyer, there must be a seller. Our survey work reported 130 business respondents buying SAP. This sample purchased over 2 million gallons of SAP annually, with the average producer buying 15 gallons of SAP annually and large businesses buying over 800,000 gallons of SAP. This seemed like it could be a demand opportunity. As I mentioned, we haven't specifically researched SAP businesses. We've looked at existing data to find out information about SAP businesses. We have 4 strictly SAP businesses that we worked with in the benchmark project, and 7% or 21 responses to our Northeast producer survey identified themselves as SAP businesses. So what does the survey say? Survey indicates opportunity. If you look at the charts up on the slides, you'll see 95% of SAP businesses indicated they're sustainable or viable, where sustainable indicates a going concern despite weak profitability, and viability indicates a profitable business with the ability to operate profitably indefinitely. When comparing SAP business to integrated operations, our survey data suggests SAP businesses as industry participants are more profitable than combined syrup processing operations. 55% of SAP businesses are able to operate as viable, profitable businesses, where only 25% of integrated operations indicated that they can operate viably. This data got me pretty excited. So we're going to stop there. I'll take a couple of questions for a minute or two, just on if anyone has questions on SAP businesses or potential opportunities. And I don't know if Tom, if you're there, if we have any questions in the chat room, that would be the place to put them. If we don't have any, just let me know and we'll move on.
And I've given everyone the option to unmute themselves. So if you do want to speak out, you can find the microphone icon, click on mute, and you can speak away.
Can you repeat those numbers for the viable? Like you said, SAP producers were 95% were saying they were profitable, whereas only 25% of regular sugar makers were not. Is that what you said?
Yeah, let's go back and look at it. Not quite, but close. So we got 3, put this slide back on, and we've got 3 categories: economically viable, sustainable, and vulnerable. Economically viable is indicating a profitable business that can maintain that. A sustainable business is a business that can carry on. Perhaps it's not profitable, perhaps it's barely profitable. Oftentimes in sugaring enterprises, people operate at break even or below break even because they have other goals in mind around land tenure and stuff like that. So SAP respondents indicated that 55% of their businesses were profitable or economically viable, whereas the integrated operations, and this is self-reported in the survey, said that 25% or 25% of them said that their businesses were economically viable. And even if you combine economic viability and sustainability, you have 95% on the SAP side, and you're looking at 85% more or less on the Maple side. And what this really, this is a small sample size. There's certainly more work to be done here to look into it. But at first blush, it seemed to me that there was potentially something here.
Thank
so
you.
we'll move on, and we'll get further into it.
There was one question in the chat, Chris.
Oh, okay.
What was the difference in metrics between sustainable and viable? So actually, you kind of went over that a little bit.
Yeah, I think whenever there's actually a definition which I wanted to have here. I don't know if Mark might know it, but we can certainly get that to folks. It's those three categories are typical categories for.
Chris, I can type into the chat box because I've
Okay.
got the definitions, and I'll just type them in.
So Mark will put those definitions in there, but they're typical ways for agricultural enterprises to look at them, to look at themselves as a business along sort of the continuum of viability. Okay, so you're sold on the idea and you want to get into the SAP business. So you only need two things. You need SAP and you need buyers. And here starts the planning process. And I always encourage business planning. MapleManager.org, which Mark mentioned, has numerous resources on business planning. You should go there. You should find the one-page plan. You should work your way through the online business planning modules. Our research indicates that business planning increases chances of business success and profitability. And I misspoke, that's not our research, but research in general shows that business planning helps businesses succeed and increases profitability. So once you have your SAP sourced and you have buyers, you establish your business by opening a checking account, setting up a system to track sales and expenses, and formalizing any lease agreements and or purchase and sales arrangements. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So first things first, we need to find a sugar bush and secure access to maple trees. The place to start is with an assessment of your potential SAP source, whether it's your land or a neighbor's. This tool was developed to aid prospective sappers in analyzing opportunities. I'm going to look at this briefly, and we're going to send information on all these tools out to you all at a later date. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. And I'm assuming you all can see this. University of Vermont Extension assessment checklist for Maple Sap business. So this is a two-page assessment that first looks at important attributes of a productive sugar bush. And we have 10 attributes here when looking at your forest resource. They look at things like tapping density, acres available, availability of utilities, access, to the sugar bush, within the sugar bush. And on the right-hand side here, there are some notes as to how you might rate your sugar bush, depending on, well, let's take one. For instance, let's start just with tapping density. So low tapping density would be sort of 1 to 19 taps per acre. Medium might be 2 to 40. High might be 40 plus. Oftentimes people use a rule of about 50 taps an acre is possible. So if you get over 40 to 50, you have a reasonable resource to start working with. And you can use these numbers in red along the top to enter a score in the scoring column. And then the other part of this that helps with business planning is you can start to estimate real broad strokes here, associated costs with securing land. Let's say you have management needed in it. You can get an idea of what that might cost and give it a score. The second sheet on this looks at a business assessment. So we look at things like markets. So what's the competition for SAP? How far are you going to need to bring your SAP? Do you have processors nearby that have reverse osmosis? Same thing here with our scoring. You're going to score from 1 to 3 in the scoring column, and add in some prices here that are associated with these various factors. And this will help get you started with business planning. Now, it just happened that there's 33 different attributes here. So if everything got a 3, you would score a 99. And that would be a high score. Anything over 50 or so is certainly worth looking at. So we're going to come back to this a little later. Like I said, this will be available. There's a lot here to digest. Once you get it and start looking at it, we'd be happy to answer your questions at a later date on. So that's sort of the first step in finding land or assessing your land that you might already have. The next step in planning is getting some of your relationships that you need in place. So I said that business is all about relationships, and it really is. As a business owner, you're managing employees or volunteers, is often the case in a sugaring operation. You're interacting with customers. SAP businesses are built on business-to-business relationships with SAP buyers, suppliers, equipment dealers, and all these relationships must be established and maintained. We have tools at Maple Manager also to understand important considerations of these relationships and to formalize these relationships if need be. The size of an operation is a consideration when developing relationships. Smaller operations with less at stake may operate more on a handshake deal, whereas larger businesses may want the security of more formal contractual relationships. I sell all my SAP on a handshake, and I negotiate the price before the season starts. One important thing about reading through these contracts, even if you're not using them, is that it'll help you understand the various factors that you should consider when you're looking at leasing land and entering into arrangements with folks, whether it's leasing land or purchase and sales contracts around SAP buying and selling. So once we found some trees to tap, now we need to sell some SAP. As I mentioned, selling SAP is a B2B business, meaning that your buyers are other businesses. Finding these buyers, developing market access is of primary importance. Best place to start is by contacting all the processors that are within trucking distance of your sugar bush. Likely, these are going to be the most important relationships to develop and maintain. Buyers are going to want to know that you can produce good SAP, and they might reject poor quality or low sugar content SAP. It's good to find processors who utilize reverse osmosis. They're going to be able to process more SAP and SAP with lower sugar content. Once buyers are identified, negotiating sales is paramount. When the SAP flows, you need to have it delivered or picked up timely before the quality degrades. Pricing needs to consider who is transporting the SAP. There are many resources on pricing SAP. And here's just a few of them. From the Bascom's price list to the Ohio SAP pricing calculator, lots of information is available. And this is great. And it highlights the most important factor in pricing, that there is no set price for SAP. I'm going to say that again, there's no set price for SAP. You have to agree on pricing with your buyer based on both of your needs. Therefore, it's essential that you know your costs. And I forget exactly what I was reading, but something that Mike Farrell, who was a former maple researcher at Cornell, and this is something he said, which I'm going to read out. The person selling SAP will have a greater incentive to gather and deliver more SAP, and more people will be enticed to get into the SAP selling business when both the person selling SAP and the person buying, processing SAP can earn a reasonable return by collaborating. This is a win-win for everyone involved. And that's really the idea here, is that if a processor has excess capacity, by buying SAP, they can increase their profits. And if a SAP seller knows their costs and knows where profitability is, they ought to be able to enter into a profitable negotiation with that processor. So an important element of pricing and selling is delivery costs. And to assist in analyzing these costs on a per load basis, we developed a SAP Hall profit calculator. And this thing is pretty fun. It's really useful on a micro level, looking at the potential profit of selling SAP on a load-by-load basis. So I'm going to click into this, and we're going to run through this calculator, do a scenario. We just got this operational for testing the end of last week, and I've been testing it since then. There's a few tweaks on it, and again, once it's ready for publication, we will share with you how to get it there. So there's 4 steps in this calculator. First one looks at what you're going to get for your SAP. So you put in the name of your operation, Terrible Mountain Maple. That's the name of my Maple Sap company. The sap comes off of Terrible Mountain, which is in Weston and Andover and Ludlow, Vermont. You want to put in the price received per gallon of sap. I'm going to put 30 cents in there. If you're not sure what your sap is worth, there's all those resources that I mentioned previously, but we also have linked right here the SAP pricing guide. And I typically aim for this 60% gross value to the SAP seller. And I get 2% SAP. Down here along the left, we have our SAP percentage. And if you're looking at bulk prices in the $2 range, $2.10 range, well, here we got 32 cents as opposed to 30 cents. So I'll actually go back. I'll adjust that up to 31. And then gallons hauled. I've got a tank in my truck. I can haul 320 gallons when it's full. The next step is inputting the cost of the equipment associated with delivery. The most expensive piece of equipment is going to likely be your truck. So we're going to look at our purchase price. I think my truck cost me about $25,000. I did get a loan on it, maybe $600 a year in interest. Of course, we've got to pay insurance. There is registration, inspection fees. There's always some repair work. Let's say maybe $1,000. And then maintenance. Another $1,000 for tires, oil, brakes, etc. You all will have a good sense of what your truck costs are here. You might have a pump. If you got more than one pump, you can lump them together in here. I have one pump. Sometimes I thought it'd be handy to have 2, but I only have 1 now. So $600, there's no interest. And you'll see that the little red asterisks here, they indicate that you have to put a value in this field. So put 0 in there if there's no other real value. I didn't have to repair my pump recently, but usually there's an oil change, etc. I have a gas pump. There's a little bit of maintenance cost in there. I've got a tank in the truck, as I mentioned. I think that cost me about $600. There's no interest, no insurance, no fees, no repairs. But it seems every year I need to buy a fitting or 2 or something. So we'll put $50 in. Whoopsie. We'll put $50 in for maintenance costs. Other equipment, maybe you've got a trailer, maybe you've got something that I haven't thought of. So here's a place just to put that in. I personally don't have any other equipment. So I'm going to put all zeros in here. We'll move on to the next page. So step 3, driving. I actually saw gas at $1.95 today. That's under $2. So we'll put that in there. I've got 2 primary SAP buyers now, and I'd recommend having more than 1 buyer if you can find them. Sometimes people are inundated with SAP and they can't take more. It's just always good to have some options. But the one that's easiest to drive to, even though they're a little further away, they're 10 miles down the highway. So we got 20 miles round trip. My truck gets 11 miles to the gallon. You've got to use whole numbers in here, and it'll tell you if you don't. This next part is important. This is annual truck miles. I got about 6,500 miles on my truck a year, but they're not all hauling sap. So in here, you're going to put your maple miles or your sap hauling miles annually as an estimation. I'd probably drive about 1,500 miles delivering sap. We'll move on to our next page. And this is where we look at labor. It says full cost of employee labor. I know a lot of the times the employee is not an employee, they're the owner. It's still really important to get a value in here for what the value of that labor is, even if it ends up being a non-cash expense. $20 is a good number. That's about 15 bucks an hour plus your taxes. I can load up my tank pretty quick. It takes me about 10 minutes. It's about 15 minutes to drive, 10 minutes to unload, and then just let's say that I can go home quicker because truck's not full. Submit, and it spits out the Terrible Mountain Maple Sap Haul report or profit report or whatever the name of your business is. And you get a number of figures here, and there's a lot of numbers here, and as you look at it and use it, you'll probably come up with new ways to look at these numbers and use them in your business. The equipment costs of fixed costs, this is the total equipment costs. The 23% is showing the percent of that usage which is allocated to your maple business. And that comes up with fixed costs here of 1772 and some change. That's broken out into a fixed cost for the load, and it also gives you a fixed cost per mile. And moving on to variable expenses for equipment. We've got some variable equipment expense in here. We've got labor, which is not all that expensive. And that gives us our variable cost per load as well as our variable cost per mile. And you add together your fixed cost and your variable cost per load to come up with your total cost per load down here of 42.22. And then you'll see here, this is the first step that we filled out, the value of SAP, $99.20. And that's what I always say. My truck tank is usually about $100. And you'll see on this load that there's $56 worth of profit in there. So that's good. That's worth delivering. But then it gets to be the end of the season. The sugar content in your SAP is going down. So let's do a scenario that looks like that. So we'll go back to revise this report. I'm just going to change a couple of things. I'm going to change the price received for SAP down to 15 cents. And that's about 1% SAP at somewhere around $2, a little more a pound bulk prices. And then the end of the season, sometimes you don't have quite enough SAP to fill your whole tank. So I went and looked, and I only had 200 gallons of SAP at 1%. Geez, is this going to be worth delivering? I'm not going to change any of the other inputs, so I'm going to scroll right to the end. I'm going to submit. And we see that that late season SAP sometimes is not really profitable to deliver. Knowing your costs is really important. This might help you. Your producer, processor, they may want this SAP. You might be able to tell them, I need a little bit more money if I'm going to deliver it to you. They may agree, they may not, but this helps you make an informed decision about delivering that load. Another feature here is you can do a download on a PDF, and you can save that report offline. So that's all. We're going to look at that right now. There is a lot there, and once we get it live, you can spend time playing around with it. So we have time now. I wanted to stop here and take any questions on perhaps valuing, pricing, negotiating, thoughts on the assessment or the calculator. We can 7:40. We can take a few questions now, a few minutes. if we've got chat questions, Tom, or if Mark, you want to unmute for a few minutes, we can take some live questions.
Yep, and people can unmute themselves if they want to speak out or use that chat box.
Okay. Well, I'll move on.
No, Chris,
What about storage?
Yeah, we got one that came in here. What about
Okay.
storage? Any suggestions?
Storage of
on,
SAP, what do you suggest?
Yep.
In terms of types of tanks, volume of storage, here, I'll address it all.
How long are you going to keep it before it goes bad? What are your constraints on storing SAP?
Okay, so then volume of tankage, you know, on a good run, you can get 2 gallons out of a tap. So that is sort of on a high flow basis. You can think about that. The types of tank you store it in and the locations that you store it are going to influence how it is preserved. Again, the season, you know, everything with the sugaring changes during the season. So when it's colder in the beginning, you might have snow up around your tank. You know, one of the folks that I deliver my sap to, they have their tank buried down in the ground and it stays nice and cold. You want to deliver your sap right away. You know, you want to deliver it as soon as you can in reality. You want to store it for as small time as possible and get it delivered to your buyer. As, you know, as I indicated before, if you have low quality sap, your buyer may reject it. So I like stainless steel tanks. I've been lucky enough to find a couple of bulk dairy tanks, which are somewhat insulated. They've got double walls and they're stainless steel. They clean up easy. They're really nice tankage. Stainless steel makes nice tanks. It's easier to clean than plastic and typically keeps the sap cooler. You want to locate your sap storage tanks in shady areas, not in the sunlight. Oh, does that get at answers to your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
All right. Any more? All right, we'll move on. So now we're going to look at a couple business models for a 1,000 tap and a 5,000 tap operation.
Chris, there was just one question in the chat.
Oh, one more?
Where would you consider tubing supplies and labor? Oh, you had labor in the form, but tubing supplies.
So in that Sap Calculator, we're really looking only at the cost of hauling that load of sap. So we're not looking at the rest of the infrastructure for gathering, collecting that sap out of the wood. So we're not looking at tubing. We're not looking at investments. We're going to touch on that in a little bit. But that particular calculator is really for looking on the real micro level at that one load of sap. And is it worth delivering it or not, given the various factors involved? We'll come up with, over time, more tools to allow for more fully modeling your SAP enterprise. So here we'll look at some business models. A business model allows you to look at potential profitability prior to jumping in head first. Now, if you've already jumped in, a business model analysis can help identify bottlenecks to your profitability. A basic business model must identify a woods resource, your own trees or others' trees, a method for generating cash. You can sell sap for cash, or you can trade for syrup and sell syrup, or you can do some of each. And an estimation of the costs and expenses with attention to key expenses for startup and operations. Compared to full production, Sap Only is less risky and has lower barriers to entry. And I say it's less risky because you have more money, or you have less money involved in your investments. So the figures we're going to look at, they've come from the UVM Maple Benchmark Project, 6 years of research. And in that time, we've collected very detailed financial data and cost of production data from over 50 maple businesses. And from this data, we've developed useful metrics for planning purposes. We've mined the data again to better understand the economics of the woods part of the operation. This work has helped us develop metrics for developing these business models. So as discussed, there's many ways to price sap, but generally, and that's what we're going to use here, general numbers, it takes 40 gallons of sap at 2% sugar to make a gallon of syrup. And given bulk prices of $2.25, I know it's a little higher than what I said, but that's what I was using when I put this model together. And remember that the bulk prices of syrup are what set the value on your sap. So giving 50 or 60% of the share to the sap producer, it makes a gallon of sap worth something around 30 cents. This table shows the range of cash that could possibly be generated given different levels of productivity in the woods. And we have gross sales here at a quart a tap, which when I first started, a quart a tap, that seemed to be a fairly reasonable metric to aim for as far as your productivity in the woods. However, today, 50, a half a gallon, 0.5 gallons per tap is regularly achieved by a lot of producers, and it's probably more of, it's certainly a bit of a high bar, but it's totally doable with careful attention in the woods and a good productive sugar bush. So at 1,000 taps, you're going to have a range here of $29, $3,000 to $6,000 more or less, and at 5,000 taps, you're going to have, $14,000, $28,000 worth of cash to work with. So from this range, you can see that there's real differing levels of productivity in the woods. And this will help us answer what's the productive value of your land. Is it enough to make a go of it? And although the trees do a lot of work for us, we still need our own labor. So let's layer in some labor. So this 0.1 hour per tap of labor in the woods is for operating labor during the season to tap out and maintain those taps and lines for good productivity. This number comes from our benchmark research and has also been tested against some other operations and has proved to be pretty reliable across the board. So that's about 6 minutes per tap. So your 1,000 tap operation is going to have about 100 hours of annual labor. Your 5,000 tap operation, you're going to have about 500 hours, more or less. And again, taking this $20 an hour labor expense, you can see the range of expense that's going to be associated with that. This is a major expense of your operation, whether or not you pay yourself. If you don't pay yourself, it still must be considered as a non-cash expense. Generally, owners put in sweat equity to ease cash flow, but a good business model has to consider owner labor. If we do the math here, we can see that there is some cash left after the labor expense. So it may be we can make a go of it here. Here's the math. Remember that these labor estimates do not include business management or delivery. But you can see from the spread over here in the remainder for operations and investment column that there is profit potential in efficient, productive operations, and there are economies at scale. These remainder figures are estimates of cash available for operations and investments. This simple model shows why productive taps are a must for a commercially viable sap enterprise. But producing a quality sap and delivering it timely takes ongoing work and investment. So let's take a quick look at investments. So from a simple startup, non-powered 3/16" tube setup to a remote generator-driven system, startup investments can vary widely. But no matter the system, a collecting and processing operation requires higher investment than a sap-only operation. As you can see from the bar chart here on the left, at least on my screen, It can cost up to 2 times as much investing, setting up a full operation as opposed to a SAP only operation. These numbers are from our benchmark project. We come to the SAP only metric for the woods infrastructure investment by looking at the woods and the sap collecting part of the operation. And they show an average investment of $30 per tap. If we crudely depreciate this over 10 years, it allows a $3 per tap expense to depreciation a year. This is a lower cost than setting up a full operation, and it eases a SAP business owner's startup, and it helps the business remain viable. So this investment cost, as it's indicated up here, does not include forest land. We'll take a quick look at forest land investment or access to forest land. And this, we're getting close to the end here. So we're going to end with land, forest land, and access to maple trees to tap. There's a wide range shown here with maple sap finances. Therefore, selecting a good site and utilizing good forest management and sound business management in tandem is necessary to ensure a sustainably viable SAP business. When you're looking at these loan numbers here, you want to look at how long it's going to be to recapture your investment. Again, let's take 10 years. And in this example, you're looking at another $1.20 to $2.40 per tap per year. It's one way to access taps is to buy some forest land. Another way is to lease taps. In Vermont, lease rates range from about 50 cents to $3. The highest lease rates are reported in Franklin County, Vermont, which produces more syrup than any other county in the state. It also has the highest utilization rate, meaning the greatest percentage of trees tapped, and it's subject to the greatest competition for taps. In Franklin County, taps regularly can rent for $2 per tap, whereas the statewide average in Vermont is closer to $1. Now, if you've been penciling along with any of this, you'll see that of the $1 to $4 that was remaining per tap after labor, most of it's going to be invested. Expenses are going to eat up more of it, and this is why most small businesses must contribute their sweat to capitalize the business, sweat equity, with much of labor expense allocation going to secure land and investment capital. So will your SAP enterprise be profitable? The question. To answer that, the first place to start is back with the assessment of your potential SAP source and how it fits in with your business opportunity and your vision and your goals. This assessment helps identify business risks to mitigate, and importantly, your operation's potential competitive advantage. You can use this assessment tool. You should use this assessment tool. And we'll be sending, as I mentioned, info on how to download a copy of this tool and the other tools after the presentation, probably the end of this week, early next week. These tools are going to help you establish your successful SAP business. So in closing, I'll say that we all come to this industry from different directions, and we each bring unique strengths to our business position. There's not always a path to profitability, but planning will identify opportunity and risk, and it will help you chart a course for success. Those are my slides. I want to thank all of you for joining tonight. I want to thank USDA AMS for their grant that supported a lot of this work. I also want to thank our collaborators. We've leaned on the SAP price calculation that Tim Perkins at the Proctor Research Center here in Vermont has put out. Some of Mike Farrell's work on SAP buying. He's got good spreadsheets. The Cornell assessing commercial potential of a site for maple sap collection, and that link is on the SAP assessment sheet that I put together, and that's a good tool for looking at. We also are building off the work of UVM professor Glenn Rogers and his cost of production on maple enterprises. That's where we started, I don't know, 7 years ago, more or less, with some of the work that he had started. And finally, I want to thank all the benchmark participants and those who have completed our surveys to help us with this work and help us better understand how to support the growing maple industry with business resources, tools, and education. So with that, it looks like there is some time to take some questions. And I will.
Yeah, Chris, we've got a couple that have come in the chat box.
Okay, great.
So
I'm going to stop sharing.
I'll read off a couple to you here as I see them.
And I'll put on my video. There you go.
Let's see. Okay. Did you find that sap prices are higher or lower if sold to an operation that uses the sap for non-syrup products, like a sap soda?
Well, I don't know. I haven't really done a lot of work with people who are doing sap sodas, even though I have that can up there. That's sort of along the innovative product, and it's interesting what people will choose to do with sap. So that's a great question. I'll take it down and I'll see, but I don't know.
An honest man, an honest answer, Chris.
It's hard to know everything.
More to look into. I got another question here. This is a good one. How does a buyer verify quality, freshness of sap, and that the sugar content is actually maple? You know, anything you've had experience with, Chris, or hear about on how that kind of quality check is actually done, either subjectively or from measurables?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I have heard over the years of less than reputable people who will attempt to sweeten their sap. I don't know if those are just stories or if they're real life. It wouldn't surprise me that that happens occasionally. And this gets back to the importance of building relationships. Some things can be quantified as far as measuring the sugar in your sap. You use a hydrometer for that. I would definitely recommend getting one that is approved by the state's Department of Weights and Measures. You can get an approved SAP hydrometer from Vermont. I don't know if all states have that, but you can certainly get one that is approved for sales in Vermont. And that's for measuring sugar content. Again, I don't know if there's a way to ensure that all that sweetness actually came out of the tree or not on a simple basis. Now, the other question of quality is sap really, you know, it looks like water coming out of the tree. It should be clear and look like water more or less in the tank. Once it starts warming up and you have a sugar environment, so you get bacteria that wants to start growing pretty rapidly, especially when the temperature elevates, the color of the sap will change. So you'll go from a clear to like a cloudy or potentially even a yellow. And when sap gets both late in the season or if it just sits around too long, you'll get insects buzzing around it and it will get a bit of a smell to it. So that's how you can tell that the quality of your sap is degraded. Color is really the first place that I look for that. Did I get all the questions there?
We did get one on sap theft. Any thoughts or any examples of theft?
So I haven't heard of theft, but I have actually heard of kind of vandalism, basically. People who will either spoil sap by putting stuff in it. So for that, depending on where your sugar bush is located, I'd recommend a sap shack. I've got the picture there of a sap shack. I know when we did this presentation in Millbury, different presentation, I've improved it since then, but some of the same things. It was noted by one of the participants that having a building that you can lock up your sap, and oftentimes you'll have equipment too that needs to be protected, is an important factor. Again, it depends on location of where those tanks are. Are they close to your house? Are they remote? Are they so remote that no one will find them? Or are they just remote from you, but still easy for other people to access? But having a sap shack that you lock up your tanks in, not a bad idea.
Got another one for you, Chris. This is a good question from Peter Gregg at Maple News. should a serious SAP only producer invest in and use a reverse osmosis unit and haul the concentrate rather than raw SAP? In